Today, we sat down with retired Marine Colonel Mike Gann. We discussed his career in the Marine Corps, lessons learned, and many other great stories. We really hope you enjoy this one.
Awesome. We're live. Mike, thank you for coming on.
My pleasure. Glad to see you guys.
This is awesome.
One more cheers.
Yes.
Cheers, sir.
Yeah, Semper.
Cheers. You know, it's not every day the front man for the Awesome Brothers band comes in the basement.
Well, my career is distinguished in that regard. You know, it was your dad that gave me my big break. So, here's to you, Brent Dewey.
Yep.
Lead singer, right?
Lead singer, that's right. And I think my career spanned a total of 3 shows that we did. And after that, we had to retire. So I don't know if that was me or if it was just that the band had gotten tired.
You know, I had a shirt. I couldn't find it. I was going to wear it. Is it Melissa made those shirts. Yeah. I had one of them. I couldn't find it.
Yeah, those are rare.
They are. They need a couple signatures, too.
Yep.
Get a Sharpie. I'm here.
That's too funny, man. Too funny. You were telling me that you went to the Tennyson service.
Right.
Would you be able to take us through the work the DPAA does and how they're able to locate these guys? Because that's amazing. They're still finding World War II guys.
Oh, yeah. It is a process. And I will tell you that when my monitor, that's the guy, your assignments guy, said, hey, we're going to send you out to Hawaii to work for the agency, I didn't know anything about it. It is not that well known throughout DoD circles. I think that if you're a family member or closely associated with that, you might have some working knowledge of it. But again, it is it's a closely held secret, I think. But yeah, there's a process. A lot of work by historians, a lot of work by researchers. You know, they're the guys that kind of, you know, shepherd the cases down the road. You know, Tennyson, he had a guy that was responsible for his case, and as information came in, they would put it in the folder, and they continue to build that folder. The historians are also the ones that kind of drive where we go to look, because they've got all the records. I mean, you talk about a treasure trove of things, everything from flight logs to intel reports. You know, they've done the work that they know down to a gnat's ass that, you know, in this area of jungle, there were 15, you know, F-4 crashes.
Wow.
You know, during the Vietnam War, you know, and so they start, you know, being able to, you know, neck that down. And when they think that they've got enough good information, they will send out an investigative team. Usually it's a couple of guys, and they will go, they'll, you know, kind of look at the terrain. One of them's an anthropologist. They'll talk to the locals, you know, they'll do interviews and, you know, see if, you know, what they're seeing on the ground, you know, kind of corroborates with what they're seeing in their research. And if it's positive, you know, they'll come back and say, you know what, there's a pretty good possibility that we might be able to find something at this site. And then what the agency will do is that they'll put together a recovery team. They'll get it on the schedule, and they'll send them out. Missions last anywhere 35 to 45 days. Probably about, 15 to 20 personnel. U.S. They'll have their country minders, if you will. You know, the people from the host country that are there supervising. And, you know, like in the case of, Vietnam, we go out to some of these, these jungle sites, and the local villages will get the villagers on board to help. So, as you can imagine, if we're digging, we're excavating, we're bringing up large amounts of dirt that's being sifted through, and that dirt has to be moved. And, we talk about the fire brigade of just buckets going down and dumping dirt as we continue to work our way down. If by the grace of God, we do find some type of biological material, osseous, bone, okay, then that will go back. And let me back up a little bit. It's key to note that it has to be a piece of biological material. You can go to a site, the guy's wedding ring can be there, his dog tags could be there, his wallet could be there, but unless there is a biological, an osseous fragment, okay, or, a skeleton, parts of a skeleton, what have you, only then, okay, can we continue the process and go back. You can't identify a guy at a site just because his wallet was there or his dog tags or any of that kind of stuff. And, we can go into the whys and why nots on that. But going forward, the material comes back, the lab begins the process, and I will tell you that to this day, I am astounded by the work that those guys do in that lab and how they're able to take even the smallest, bone fragment or tooth or what have you and work that down and derive DNA from that. And we're able to get DNA. Most of the guys that we're hunting for, well, I guess I can't say that. The families donate DNA so that the lab can use that. And your family had done the same for Bob Curry. And anyway, so that's on file. They get the DNA, and I'm just kind of short forming it here. They get the DNA. Once they get a positive match, okay, they'll let the family know that we've made an identification, and then they'll, identify. The last step, strangely enough, is before we can actually claim an identification is that the coroner, and we have our own coroner at the agency, he has to do a death certificate. And once the death certificate is signed, then we can make the identification. Then we bring the family out to Hawaii in a lot of cases, and there's a room right off of the lab, probably no bigger than this little area that we're sitting in, and they'll put these sets of remains out there, and they'll bring the family in. It's a closed curtain area, and give them a chance to be with their loved one. And I'm telling you that because there's a story that I want to throw out there, and again, it really resonates with me even to this day. We were in there. There was a lady, older lady. Her father had been missing. We had found his remains, and it was just a small handful of bone fragments. And anyway, we had it all out, laid in the box in the room, and we're bringing her up through the elevator, and we get ready to go into the room, and she pauses. And she's a little older, and we're a little concerned, like, what's going on? And she's messing with her hair. And I'm like, is everything okay? She goes, she said, I just wanted to make sure I look good because I'm going to meet my father for the first time.
Wow.
And I mean, look at you see my arms right now? I mean, just to this day, that story. And what that says, it says a lot. That speaks a lot. When I first got to that agency, I had no idea of the impact or the depth of the grief that is associated with this. And I say the depth of the grief is because I've seen so many cases where it's not the son or the daughter, okay, but it's a cousin 3 generations removed, but that story has been handed down through the generations. Because my first instinct was, how the hell do these guys, why are they all, weepy over this? I mean, they didn't even know the guy. Bullshit. They knew the dude. They knew him through the family story all the way back. So I learned very early that you never question anybody in this business on their level of grief. Okay? And I will tell you that the job is very rewarding, but it is also fraught with emotional dangers, and also it's very political. And I thought, how could something this, kind of pure, finding guys,
sacred.
How could that be political? Stand by. Okay. I don't know. See, give me the eyebrow because we're starting to get down that rabbit hole. But the politics of this thing, families want to know. There's only so many analysts that are out there, so many case handlers. There's only so many places that we can go in a year to dig, and you got families that have been waiting, and like every chance they get, why not me? Why can't we get ours done? We're sorry, we don't have any additional information. Well, that's bullshit, You're not trying hard enough. And we're just, but you don't think about that. I mean, they're solely focused. And if they're not happy, they go to their congressman. And if congressman's not happy, then, they start asking us questions like, what are you guys doing? And there's advocate groups out there, and I will tell you, they sway a lot of power. And, God love them. That's what they do, just make sure that we're continuing to march. Because I will tell you, the agency, it's had its ups and downs as far as its name is concerned, its good name is concerned. And when I got there in 2015, we were just in the beginning of a reorganization directed by Congress because of some of the problems that had come up over the years. Okay, and people raising their hands saying, you need to look at these guys because they're not doing it the way they should be doing it. So anyway, I got right down that rabbit hole like I told you that I would do right off the bat.
You're more than fine to do it.
The bottom line is that it is an iterative process that goes on because, again, the researchers continue to research. And while the researching's going on, they're out there digging, okay? And while the digging's going on, they may not find anything, so it slings back into the research. And the researchers go, and then they find something else, boom. And eventually, all that stuff running in, kind of the same orbit, it'll spit out, hopefully, a set of remains that we're able to positively identify and bring that, person, that loved one back to the families.
That's extraordinary work.
Talk about fulfilling.
Yep. Yeah, that was my last job in the Marine Corps. I'd come out of command of a regiment, and I thought, how do you top that? I mean, as a colonel, to command a regiment, that's pretty special. But I got to finish there, and I got to travel. I got to go to battlefields that, I had grown up in the Marine Corps reading about and learning about, and it's in our lore and it's in our history. I can remember going into Tarawa, and we brought back 17 sets of remains out of Tarawa. One of our partnered organizations had made this discovery of a set of graves that had been dug right after the fight. Unfortunately, when it came time to put an airfield in there, they just simply picked up the crosses and moved them, and they just built up over these rows of graves. So there were lost rows of graves. And guys doing research, you know what, let's go back and let's look. And I mean, they went into, houses had been built over these things now at this point, in the 2000s. Digging down through the basement or through the floor of a house, a latrine. There was a bathroom, and sure enough, they found the lead edge of the trench. And in fact, one of the guys that they found in there was a Medal of Honor winner by the name of Alexander Bonnyman. And he's a second lieutenant and had died in that fight. But I got to get on the plane with those flag draped coffins to go back to the States, back to Hawaii, and to be there, when that plane touches down and the ramp lowers, and we take those caskets off there, and these guys are touching American soil for the first time in over 70 years. So they went away at 18 or 19 years old and had been gone. And it's a very powerful thing, because as a Marine, that's what allows us to go outside the fence and do the things that we do, to go on the patrols, go do those things that are fraught with danger, because we know that if something happens, somebody is going to come and find us. Okay, you talk about World War II, of that scale, right? But I leaned at a guy and said, those guys, they're all thanking us for not forgetting and for bringing us home. So, Troy, yeah, it's a fulfilling job, despite all the emotional, political bullshit that happens. To be there, when those guys touch ground, it's an amazing feeling. And to the Tennyson piece, at the agency, we don't often get the opportunity to see it carried to that extent where they're actually being interred. Okay, there's a few that would happen, and they would, want to be buried in Hawaii at the military, the Punch Bowl Cemetery. But to see it, that kind of is the final, straw on that. And again, I stood out there. It was hot, and it was very fulfilling to see, that flag being handed to that, grandson, and kind of seeing the final closure for the family. So.
That's amazing. You said 17 sets of remains at Tarawa. That's 17 families.
Yep.
And that's probably hundreds of people lives that you impacted with your work.
Well, in fairness, of the 17 sets of remains, I would have to go back and get the numbers, because they weren't all immediately identified. Okay, so these guys were put in these graves, wrapped in their ponchos with their their gear and all that. But again, as far as an immediate identification, hard to say. They have a Tarawa section up there that they set up to handle this larger amount of remains. Great story, just flashed through my mind too. But and they'll sit on the shelf as they continue to work through each set. Trying to make some type of identification from that.
Go for it if you got a story.
No, I was just thinking, when you talk about sets of remains, at the agency, they built a new facility, and in 2015 we moved into it. And on the third floor of this facility is the lab. And at that lab, they have, probably 100, well, maybe not 100 yards, maybe 70 yards worth of windows in the hallway, floor to ceiling. And on the other side of those windows is is where the slabs are, where they lay out the remains that they're working on. And I talk about the remains. When the ones came back from Tarawa, you could tell those bones had been in the ground. They were almost, I don't want to say red, but they were dirt tinted, if you will. Conversely, they had remains in the same area from the guys that were lost on the USS Oklahoma. And you guys, I don't know if you know, Arizona gets all the credit out there, but the USS Oklahoma was another, just tragic story. The boat had gone over, the ship had gone over, and about 400 of those guys got trapped in there. And they tried for days. You can imagine a battleship, the armor to protect it. Now it's on its head. The compartments have filled up with water and oil and all that. And, after a couple days, the pinging just kind of stopped. And so they estimated there was roughly 400 of those guys that were lost. They did the best they could to collect the remains, keep them, segregated. They put them in a cemetery. And again, so this is, 1941 or 42 time frame. In 52 or 57, I can't remember the year, they pulled them up out of the ground again, and they put them in the Punch Bowl, the National Military Cemetery of the Pacific. I'm sure I'm messing that name up. It's been too long. And my first day on the job at the agency, we had gotten the permission to go and begin the disinterment of the first of 398 or 388 of these guys. And so we went to the Punch Bowl. They dug up the casket. Inside of the casket, there were bundles of remains, and took them back to the lab, began the process. Well, they laid those guys out, and because those remains had sat in that ship with all that fuel oil and all that, they were almost black. So you could see the Tarawa remains over here, as the, kind of the red dirt, and then those are definitely Oklahoman because they were, completely black. And great story on that. They started doing that in 15, and I think as of last count, they were up in the upper 300s of making identifications on all those guys that they had done. But yeah, that's and again, go back to the emotional piece. When I would start to get pissed off mood, or I was doubting what I was doing, I started making sure that every day I finished my day walking the line. I would go up and walk the hall and just see that, that's exactly why I'm here. All this other stuff is, it's minutia. Right here's the reason, why we're here. And so the remains kind of kept me, focused. And in turn, I try to help keep my team focused.
What's it like building relationships with these countries to be able to go there and do that? Because I'm sure there's a lot of tape that needs cut.
Great question. I will start off with one side of the coin, Vietnam. I'll use Vietnam as an example, or Laos, any of those countries. Those are the communist countries, and everything there is run by the state. There's a great level of distrust. Earlier when I talked about having the host nation team there with you, they're like your minders, because they want to make sure that you're not planting, communication devices or whatever other weird shit they think that we're doing out there. Okay. Their job is also to extract the most amount of money out of our government as they can to allow us access into there. And we always say we don't pay for remains, but we kind of do, because it ends up being, the cost of the mission, right? To do a 35-day mission into Vietnam, that used to cost me about $3 million out of my budget for a 40-day mission. And a lot of the time it would be a dry hole. We would go back to the same area time and time again, and digging in a different location. Okay, but it would be a dry hole. So keep that figure in the back of your head, right? So to continue on that thread, every year we would hold consultative talks with the Vietnamese. We hold them with the Lao, the Cambodians, and essentially we would go in and begin the negotiation process. How many times are you going to let us in the country? Okay, how much are you going to charge us? We have to use their aircraft. They don't want any green, U.S. helicopters flying around their, space. That's surveillance as far as they're concerned. Plus, hell yeah, I can give you 3 of my, antiquated Mi-17 death machines and haul your guys around, at a much, reduced price because you're our friends, right? Right. So anyway, the consultative side, and they can be very contentious. But what I learned is that it is all part of the theater associated with the mission. We know we're going to go in there and do the mission. They know we're going to go in there and do the mission. We're going to push back on this. They're going to push back on that. We know that going in. You take the same script that you had from the year before and you essentially change the date on it, and then we're ready to go. Okay, it's that predictable. Okay, now that's Vietnam. Okay, we go to a place like Solomon Islands. Okay, Guadalcanal, great example. They love us down there. Because there are people that still remember what the Marines did, during World War II, and that, like everything else, gets passed up through the families. And so, very, very much so, not contentious, And I can go down there and run a mission 35, 40 days for about $395,000. And because it's not Vietnam, and I guess I'll hit on that again, but chances are I may find a fully articulated skeleton, or I'm going to be finding bones. Vietnam, again, you got to understand, because the acidic nature of the soil, right? The fact that these guys that were in these airplanes probably going 500 miles an hour with their hair on fire, when they crash, there's not a lot left. Okay, and like I said, the soil is very acidic, and so any remains that are in there are slowly getting, chewed up, eaten away. So that's, the case where you might find a tooth, okay, or something. Whereas, you get into Guadalcanal or you go to Tarawa, there's a fully articulated skeleton, right? So, dealing with them, it's easy, okay? I will say that going into Papua New Guinea, that was going to be my first away trip. The day before I was leaving, my boss calls me in and says, you have to cancel. The ambassador had a case of the ass with the agency over some of the dealings that had happened prior to me getting there. And we were essentially persona non grata in Papua New Guinea. We'd say PNG, and PNG is what we were. And eventually I got to get back in, and I sat in the ambassador's office there, and he wore my ass out for 45 minutes. I mean, did everything but called my mom a dirty whore. And I'm sitting there, and I got to take it. It wasn't, this is the cost of doing business, right? And we had our act of contrition, and they let us back into the country, and we started doing good things. Tennyson, Papua New Guinea, North Coast. So again, I think that having that good relationship, and the guy that wore me out, he left, and they had a new ambassador come in, and it was a female lady that had some prior knowledge of our existence and was really welcoming, and and so as far as coordination with them, we'd give them a heads up, maybe 4 months out. Hey, we'd like to come over and take a look around and go into this area. Okay, yeah, no problem. Stop by the embassy, kiss the ring, and then we're off to do our business. And so it's kind of two ends of the spectrum. Again, we talk about the political and emotional side of it. The Vietnam families, just for background, they're the ones that really got this whole thing up off the ground as a result of the Vietnam War. And that's how it used to be, just the Vietnam war dudes that we were looking for. It wasn't until 2008 or 9 where they put the World War II guys in on top, and so you went from about, let's see, what was it for Vietnam? 1,500 roughly, order of magnitude in the Vietnam War that were still MIA. And then you add in, 73,000 from World War II. Holy shit, your little, slice of, the agency now, it was working something somewhat comfortable. There was almost no limit. Okay. So anyway, the Vietnam families are the ones that got that going. They are very vocal. They're very tied in with Congress, and they have a very strong lobby. Their families are concerned that because the soil is so acidic, that the longer that we delay getting to these sites, the less chance of recovery that there's going to be. And there's always this kind of tug of war. They're like, why are you worried about these World War II families when our remains are rotting in the soil, and we're gonna there's urbanization. We're building up, the jungles are getting cleared out, they're putting up high-rise hotels and stuff. But again, going back to my thing about whose grief is more, World War II guy or Vietnam guy? And so it was a balancing act, because I'd get a budget and I would take my money, and I think my budget was $41 million for a fiscal year. And, I could plan X number of recovery teams going out to do the digging, X number of investigative teams going out there to do the homework, And I would try to divide those up, somewhat equally, so that, the Korean or the World War II folks and the Vietnam War folks were kind of, that lasted about 20 seconds. When our schedule was presented to the families of the Vietnam War folks, it was deemed totally unacceptable. So I will tell you this, that 78% of my budget of that $41 million went to the Vietnam War, and the rest of it went to World War II. And I will tell you that, you go back to my story about, $4 million to do a Vietnam mission, 35 days, and maybe get skunked, whereas you spend $396,000 and go down to Solomon's or P&G and you find material. Logically, you would think, let's go to the place where we can find that. But that's not how it works. Again, it's very, politically and emotionally tied. And, we talked about the disinterments, right? We talked about USS Oklahoma and those guys that were buried. There's Vietnam families that are like, why in the hell are you digging these guys up? You know where they are. Get out into the jungle and find our guy. And it's just like, okay, whose grief? We can make an identification here. And I'm just telling you, that will tie into, our discussion later if we get into the Father Capon piece on how we, how that ended up, kind of unfolding. Okay, so again, just to bring this full circle and hopefully get off the bandwagon here, but it is an outstanding mission. I am still in contact to this day, and I've been retired for 6 years now. I'm still in contact with guys that are on mission. The guys working down in Papua New Guinea, both on the agency side and on the contractor side, because there's contracted, organizations that are working out there on behalf of DPAA, continuing to do the work. Because obviously, 81,000 total missing, right? DPAA and its 683 or whatever the number is now employees, that ain't going to happen without help from the outside. So anyway, it was a great way to end my career, and I think to some extent it was life altering for me, and I really feel fortunate that I was given that opportunity at that time in my life to do that, and that's all I'm going to say about that.
That's That's a shame that even politics can get into that.
Yeah.
That seems like the most
Pure.
Yep. work you can do, really, and politics is going to get into that.
Yep.
How far back do you guys go? Do you go World War II? Is that about as far as
World
you can
War
go?
II is the farthest they'll go. There are, obviously we do Korea. Access into North Korea is not an option. We were able to run some missions back in the early 2000s. They let us in the country for a couple of rotations. But again, talking to the old hands on deck, they would take us to a site and say, you have to dig here. And sure as shit, we would dig there and we would find bones. Problem is that, anthropologists can look at a bone that's in the ground, and they know that if it has been, tampered with or something, or if it's, not in its original setting. And every one of those sites was like that. And, the prevailing thought was that they had harvested a great deal of the remains of the U.S. servicemen, and they'd taken these remains and they'd put them in warehouses, in boxes, okay, to use as a bargaining chip. And over the years, they had piecemealed sets of remains back to the States. Okay, there was we call it the K-208 program. There was like 208 sets of remains that came back, and that kind of began the process. One of my last days on the agency, we brought back 55 sets of remains from North Korea, and we had a great ceremony. And when they got the remains up in the lab, there was in excess of 96 different people in those bodies. They wasn't just 55 dudes, and there's 3 femurs and a okay. The bottom line is that I think when they started sorting through all that, instead of having 55, there was parts and pieces of 96 in that. So anyway, we don't get into North Korea, a little bit of digging at South Korea, but the preponderance of our work is for Vietnam War and World War II. Now, I threw that number out there, 81,000. Of that, and again, my figures are dated because it's been, so many years since I, left the agency. But at the time, we felt that of that 82,000, about 26,000 of those were going to be recoverable. Everything else was either a deep sea loss or, there was no way that we were going to find that. So 26,000, we thought, I'm sure they still think that is the number that we're going to get to. But yes, we don't go any further back than World War II, and we go all the way up through global war on terror. There's, I want to say 4 or 6 contractors that had gone missing. Desert Storm, back in 1990, we had some aircraft go missing. I don't know if you guys remember the bombing of Libya in the early 80s. That's probably ancient freaking history for you. But we lost aircraft there too. So there's a handful of those, but the preponderance, and I think it's 1,500-ish for the Vietnam War. And, again, I'll just say 72,500 for World War II. And, that's a pretty big span. That's a pretty big portfolio to do. And, you figure right now, averaging 200 plus, 200, maybe 220 identifications a year. This thing is going to go on, forever. So, it's a huge task, but it is a national imperative. We sent those guys off to war. We owe it to them to exhaust every, avenue that we have to bring them home. And I used to, the agency's budget when I was there was like $131 million. As part of the Department of Defense. Department of Defense budget back then was, almost $800 million. I mean, 131 million was a squirt of piss. I mean, it's a rounding error, right? And, we would fight, give us more money, give us more people, give us more time. And, I mean, we would get fought. They would fight us. It's too much. You're going to get what you get. And, we'll keep plodding. We'll keep working until they, physically remove us from the building.
What's the procedure, if any, for these guys that go down in the water? Like you brought up Bob Curry, who went down outside of Palau. Is there a procedure? Because by now you'd think his airplane and he could be off the coast of Australia.
Yep, and that's the thing. Water losses are tough. Again, they go back to the historians. The eyewitness accounts. They go back to the flight logs. Because the guys would come back off mission and one of their teammates got shot down, they would debrief them and they would capture all that. And he was last seen in flames, going down in this general location, no parachutes. Okay. And so from that, now we can start, kind of the bulls, the rings, and in the case of Bob Curry, we just it's funny because I really didn't know about Bob's story, and I was home for Christmas and it came up one time, and I said, well, let me go back and look into it and see what we have. And sure enough, we had a file on the guy. It had reached a dead end, but funny enough, there was a Scripps Institute was out running sonar, and we got them. I said, hey, I want you to look in this area, and we gave them a box, and they ran a whole sonar scan of the area that Bob's aircraft was potentially in.
How deep are we talking?
There it was probably 125 feet, I think. But the thing is, and I think Pete kind of hit on this the other night, is that in that area there was a shelf. Okay, and so that water was relatively shallow, but then it drops off to the bottom of the earth at that point in the world. And I think that over time, the ebb and flow of the tides, it may have just washed that plane, over the edge into that canyon, or And I think that that's the case in a lot of these. The ocean is very powerful, and you get a good feel for that, being out in the middle of it, in 30-foot seas, and you're just like, oh God, if this boat comes apart, we are done. But underwater losses are problematic in that, because again, you have to bring in the divers, and divers only get so much time, bottom time in a day, right? Because the physiological piece of it. And they essentially do the same kind of work they do on the land. They go on the floor and they set up a grid, and now you're in the and you're going with a huge vacuum, picking up dirt in these all these grid squares.
God, it seems like such a needle in a haystack.
It is,
and that doesn't even do it justice.
Yeah, but that's the thing, when lightning does strike and you do identify a guy, that makes it that much more. It makes it that much more special. And so the other thing too is Vietnam War. We'll go back to that. We've got losses off the coast of China, and now we're dealing with the Chinese. They don't. There are losses from World War II, Vietnam, and Korea in China. All three of those conflicts, we've got losses there. And trying to get into there and do work. I did 2 delegations into China, and we really thought we were making some progress. We were talking to what we didn't realize at the time, because we were too vain. We were talking to third-tier party members who had no intention of allowing us into the areas that we wanted to get to. But they patted us on the head. They assured us that there are teammates who are going to be working with us. They wined us, they dined us, they did all that kind of stuff. And when it came time to go, no, we can't let you in there. We can't let you in there.
Damn.
But off the coast of China, now you've got, you got U.S. DOD personnel now starting to get close to the coast. And so it's quite, and the Vietnamese, they get itchy about it, because they don't want to piss off the Chinese. And I mean, obviously, you can see why, but water losses are problematic. And that's, that just is another example. When they do find a guy in the water, Tennyson, for example, that's a huge win. That's a huge win.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Would you be able to take us through the process of finding Father Capon?
Okay. Truth in lending. I really didn't know much about it until I was home. Again, it was a Christmas. I came home on leave during Christmas time, and my brother, we were talking about it. He goes, "Hey, there's this priest that I think was living at the Blessed Sacrament Rectory, or the house over there, and he was the guy that was kind of ramrodding the push for Father Capon's canonization." And again, my old timer's disease, I can't remember the guy's name, but anyway, my brother Matt asked me to go and speak with him, and I did, and he started talking about this, and I'm like, Father, I don't know much about it, but when I get back, I'll start pulling the thread, on this thing. And, again, you can imagine the agency, everybody's got their head down, and they're all pushing forward. And, right, 26,000, 81,000, whatever cases are out there. And I started asking the question, and people are going, "Oh, yeah." And the first thing, they thought I was full of shit because I said Father Capon. Well, they all referred to him as Father Capon. And, of course, I'm I got the donkey's head on because, I'm pretending like, I know all about this. I didn't. So anyway, there was a doctor by the name of Jenny Jin, Korean, who was in charge of our Korean project on the lab side. And there was a historian by the name of Dr. Don Berry, who worked down in my directorate. And I kind of huddled up with them. And Don Berry, said that she would dig into it. And she'd been with the agency for a little while. And I may be talking out my ass, and, there may be some guys in D.C. that, if they, for some reason, see this podcast, will say I'm full of shit. But I'm just saying that I think that she was the catalyst in kind of turning this whole thing around. Because we did have a bunch of Korean remains that were in the Punch Bowl Cemetery. And I think a year before I rotated out of there, we got permission to do the disinterment of the 650 sets of remains that were in there, the unknowns, so that we could begin that process of doing kind of what we did with Oklahoma. We get them laid out, we get them sorted out, we start doing the DNA testing, all that kind of stuff. Question then became, where do you start? Okay, you don't get to bring up all 650 at the same time. You'll do 8 at a time or whatever. I don't know what the final count ended up being as far as how many they were letting them bring up at a time. But normally it was 7 or 8 sets, caskets that would come up. Don Berry was the one that said, "Hey, okay, back up. Father Capon was in one of the camps, Camp 1 or Camp 5, and again, I can't remember. I think it was Camp 1 or Camp 5. Anyway, the set of remains that came out of that camp, okay, Don Berry had figured out that they may have just flip-flopped those. The guys that they thought were Camp 5 were actually the Camp 1 guys. And the guys that were the Camp 5 guys were actually the Camp 1 guys. And so when they made the decision who they were going to bring up first, they went to the kind of the opposite. And lightning struck, and in that set of remains, that disinterment, that set the remains that came out of that disinterment, that's where they found Father Capon. I got a call, I got a message, a text from Dr. Jin on, it was right before Christmas, in 2019, and she says, "Hey sir, we we got him. She goes, I won't say anything else. You cannot, I'm just telling you, we got the guy. And of course, after that, it wasn't until I think March before they were able to officially say, yeah, he's the dude. But again, it was I give Dawn Berry a lot of credit, Dr. Dawn, because, she was the one that kind of made that correlation there. Don't get me wrong. There are guys that I know, because we have a Korean War section in D.C. that, they've been, I'm sure, a full court press on that up to a point. Okay, you got all the information in the world, but that last piece wasn't there. And I think Dawn Berry was the one that made that discovery. So, I like to give her a lot of the credit for that. But, my part in it is nothing more than asking a question. And again, it's just trying to refocus something that is, it's all over the place, because we're focused over here for World War II, and we're trying to, we got these missions set up, and, we got some cases over there that look, pretty promising. So we're focusing on that. Father Caven had kind of been a dry hole. And, all it took was a little, somebody getting energized. Okay. And I'll throw another story in there because this is old man story hour, right?
Yeah.
I was down in when I was down in Palau. George Bush, Senior, he was shot down over there, and he got rescued, and he was on his deathbed, and he made a request that they, he wanted, if anything, to find his wingman who had gone down. And anyway, okay, so we ran a mission down there. I happened to be there, and they found that dude's plane. I've got a picture of the whole front end with the faint markings, the numbering on it that identify, and it's sitting right on the platform. And those guys, they found the dude.
Wow.
Yeah.
When was that?
I want to say 17, maybe 2017.
Because he didn't die all that long ago.
No. And yeah, again, the time space thing, it begins to elude me more and more every day. I don't know why that could be.
Yeah.
What an amazing thing, though, is that you have this guy who's been a president, who has been in, the political family, like Bush's, Clinton's, like right. That's what you think. And on his deathbed, when people are on their deathbed, you think you really get to see them. And on his deathbed, after everything he's seen, he asked to go find his wingman. Like that tells you something.
Yeah. And that was again, another one of those great stories, great to be a part of that. So I don't know how I got down that rabbit hole. Where were we talking? Oh, we were talking about Father Caven. So it's not one person. It was the agency that did this, and again, it just goes to show the tenacity and the dedication that these people have. I mean, they're dedicated to the mission, and they may not like each other. They may fight, at the drop of a hat, each other, between the scientists and the historians and the political. People, the policy people. I can tell you, I was involved in some of this brawling. Not physical, but I mean just downright. But when it all comes down to it, everybody's got the same goal, and that's to bring dudes home.
Man. Well, that's fantastic work.
That is.
Yeah. It's
what a perspective.
Hell of a way to go out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to almost put it into words from being on the outside what that is, what that means to so many people, so many families.
Yeah.
Think of all the people you've impacted.
Yep. And again, going back to my first story about that lady, I still get emotional, thinking about that. I'm going to meet my father for the first time. Fuck, man.
Right.
Don't ever say that again. Jesus, that was. I'm standing there in my uniform, just like lip quivering, like
making an impact doesn't do it one lick of justice. I mean, you are leaving an imprint on their life that is so large that you can't even really comprehend it.
Yep. Yeah, and again, it is still amazing to me how through family story it continues to cascade down through the generation. I mean, you know, your uncle, I mean, he was as engaged as any. You know, Paula, I mean, they are, I mean, Kathy, you know, your mom, they are totally interested in that kind of stuff. I mean, and you know, how many generations is that removed? You know, so yeah, it was a great way. It was a great way to go out.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Take us through the beginning for you. What was it that got you to join the military? Is it something you always knew you were going to do?
Okay. Truth in lending. You know, I was at Bishop Carroll senior year. The Marine recruiter comes in. He's in his dress blues, you know, and that's, you know, the penultimate uniform of all time. And you know, I went and started talking to the guy, and you know, I was hooked. I want to get me one of those good-looking costumes, right? So I said, yeah, I'm gonna join the Marines. And my folks basically said, hey, what we'd like you to do, we want you to go to college first. You know, try college. You know, we'll pay for it. You know, just, you know, give it a shot. Well, I went to Wichita State. My first semester, I probably attended class like 3 days out of the entire semester. When the grades came, and I knew I was in a world of shit, and you know, my mom said, "That's it. Okay, we're pulling the funds. You got to get a job. You know, it's on you now." So I said, "What am I gonna?" I went down and I enlisted in the Marines. I enlisted in reserves. Okay, so I signed up on the 10th of January. On the 19th of January, I was standing on the footprints in San Diego, wondering what in the hell had I just done to myself. I'd shot myself in the head. I didn't even know it. And you know, from then on, it was there. You know, I graduated boot camp. I came back. You know, I started working because I didn't have any money. You know, and I was only having to do the 1 weekend a month, you know, drill thing, you know, for the reserves. So I was wiring house. I was got a job with Al Klein. You guys know Al Klein?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yep.
Got a job over at Lowry Electric, and you know, was an apprentice electrician. Did that for a number of years. Started to go back to school at night. You know, that was challenging. The guy I worked for, Coy Lowry, I owe him a debt of gratitude. Towards the end there, he would give me Tuesdays and Thursdays, the mornings off, so I could get classes in, and then he kept my job so that I could come back and work, you know, in the afternoons, which was great. So eventually, I got my degree, went to OCS, and got my commission. And then I did 30 years of, you know, active duty. Never said retired in January 1st of 2019. So
30 years?
35 years, 11 months, and 21 days, including my reserve time that was in there.
So like 22 to 57?
I was 18. I turned 19 in boot camp. Happy birthday to me, which my birthday was I got there on the 19th. My birthday was on the 23rd. So it was worst birthday ever. But yeah, I'm trying to think how old I was when I quit. Yeah, I don't know. I was told it wasn't going to be math here, but yeah, it was 55. 55, I think it was, when I finally hung up the gun belt. So, long answer to a short question, but you know, if you go back and look at the Bishop Carroll yearbook for our year, you know, and it always has what your plans are. Mine was to join the Marine Corps and also be a broadcast journalist, which, you know, I don't know what the hell that came from, but.
Was that before or after you got impeached as class president?
Yeah, that's. I think impeachment is a very strong word to use.
Somebody told me you're the only Bishop Carroll class president ever to be impeached. I don't know if that's true or not.
I think impeachment is a very strong word.
You could be right.
Yeah, your dad told you that, didn't he?
I don't know. I honestly don't know who did, but I've heard it more than once.
The lore is out there. But that was a rough year. Turns out that we made some funding decisions that were not fiscally sound, and what had once been a big nest egg had been obliterated by some bad decisions. So.
I thought you broke your leg or something.
No, I did. I broke my leg playing football that year, and I was in the hospital because back then the way they fixed a broken femur isn't like the way they do it now. I had to sit in a hospital bed for a month in traction. They were trying to, because when that leg when it broke, the muscles contract and they just pull the bones like that. So now they got to try to get it out like this. So it took a while, but yeah, I lost a month there, and then I was in a down body cast that went from right here at my pecs all the way down to my my pubic bone, and then all the way down my right leg. I was in that for 3 months, scooting around the hallways up there at the old and it was all stairs, so it was always fraught with danger. But yeah, impeachment is a very strong word. Very.
At least you have Brent Dewey helping you carry up the stairs.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you. I asked you if you guys knew my friend Mexican Bob, but that's how we became friends. That year, we had a couple of more than one, probably 5 classes together, and they always let me leave 5 minutes early so I could get a head start. And he wrangled some deal where I'm going to help him carry his books. So that's what it was. He just got out of class early, because I still had the backpack on,
He's just walking next to you.
Yeah. But, after that, we struck up a friendship. And to this day, he was at my house over Memorial Day, came to visit. And good friend. But, yeah. Yeah, that was, wow, that was 180 out from anything I thought you guys would be asking.
Oh, it's just things
we do our homework.
It's just things we hear. It's just things we hear.
Yeah, I'm starting to sweat here. Maybe you should turn that air conditioner on.
Throughout your career, you've been all over the world. How has that been? Because I'm sure you got to move family. Like the logistics of all that.
19 moves in 30 years.
Wow.
My daughter went to 3 high schools in 4 years.
Wow.
So as you can imagine, my standing in the Father of the Year Club was up there. It was up there. Fortunately, she did get to do her junior and senior year at the same place, which was good. Now, my deployment, going around the world doing those, things. My family, for the most part, stayed in the States. They never lived overseas. If I went, it was either combat deployment, or I was going to train, or I was, for a short amount of time, or I was going to do what we used to call the unit deployment program, where you would go as a unit to Okinawa, Japan for 6 months, and they would just rotate units through there. So the 3rd Marine Division over there had a ready force of guys that were, ready to, fight in case Korea kicked off. So all the units in the stateside would send complete units over there, and you do it 6 months at a time. And this is going to tie in. This is going to tie into a question I know you're going to ask, or you said you were going to ask about the UFC.
Oh,
just hold that thought.
Yep.
And we'll go from there. But yeah. It was the Taliban doesn't give me the PTSD that the smell of cardboard boxes gives me. You know what I'm saying? When I see cardboard boxes, I start shaking because that means it's time for another move. We had our own, and we still do. You can go into my tool chest right now. There's 1, 2, 3 box knives that I bought at Lowe's. Cobalt with the blue handles on them that we used on every move to open the. Allison, when she got old enough, she had her own. Debbie had her own. My wife to this day, we're never moving again. You can bury us in that house. When we go, just put us in there and then light it on fire, and then we're going to drive them. We are never, ever, ever moving again. Cardboard boxes and the smell of cardboard, that's a trigger, big trigger.
I don't blame you for not wanting to move. I don't blame you at all.
Yeah. And, again, you think about, this is our first home that I ever bought, Well, I take it back. When I was in Texas, we bought a house. We were only there for 2 years. But, Debbie and I both, for Debbie, this is the longest that she's ever lived anywhere. Period. Because her dad was in banking, and he moved around a lot. They moved around a lot. Me, I grew up, right down the road here on Coolidge.
Yeah.
Yep. And that was great. 20 years in one place, easy day. But we moved one time. We moved out to the desert again, out to 29 Palms, and we were only there for 10 months. I get there thinking it's going to be a 3-year job, and go into work. I'm there the second day. Boom, the command list comes out, and I popped on the command list, which means I've been selected. So I'm going to be leaving in 10 months to go take command of a regiment. And so, Al's thinking she's going to be in school, the same school for 3 years. It's all going to be great. I got to go home that night, and at the dinner table tell them, hey, I hope you had a good 10 months here, because that's all you're getting, and we're going. But I'll tell you, that kid she's super resilient, and
how could she not be?
Yeah, she is, and she's hard as woodpecker lips too. I'm telling you what, I created a monster in that one, and she get that look in her eye, and it's like, stand by, boy, put your hand on your knife, because it's about ready to get potentially ugly. Sorry, Al.
Once you graduated from the Marines, where did you go first?
Well, when I went on active duty, you go to OCS, and then you go to a place called the Basic School, and it's 6 months where they teach every Marine officer how to be an infantry platoon commander. Okay, so you go, and it's kind of like a finishing school, and a lot of these guys, most of them had never been in the Marines before. I had the luxury of, 5+ years as a reserve dude, so I, kind of knew the system. I knew some of these guys know, so they teach you how to be a Marine officer, and it's training. I mean, you do all the combatives, and you do the marksmanship training, and all that the marching, the whole 9 yards. How to write a fitness report, how to do a training plan, all this stuff, okay? Finish that, 6 months. I go to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to artillery school, because I was an artillery officer by trade. That's 6 months where they teach you everything about, and it truly is rocket science, to take an artillery round, leave a tube, and make it land at a place that you desire, 20 clicks away, in the place that you desire. The point being is that you go through all that, and then at that 6 months, when I was there is when Saddam Hussein crossed into Kuwait. So they started to accelerate our training. And so I am getting married, right, in November. I graduate from the school, right, go back, get married. 5 days later, I'm going to California to hook up with my unit to go to the Gulf War. I was the last dude to show up on for my unit before we got on the boat to go. And it was crazy. And we didn't do a honeymoon or anything like that. It was funny because you're filling out wills and powers of attorney, and not exactly the the honeymoon thing. So, my first assignment, I went to Camp Pendleton. I was a forward observer with an infantry rifle company out of 5th Marines. And, day one on the ground, going to combat. That was my first, and, coming back, we got back, I think in July. The ground war was over in February, but, because we were on the boats, of course, they had the Jack with us. And we went into Bangladesh. We did typhoon relief in Bangladesh. Coming back to the Philippines, right when we were leaving there, Mount Pinatubo went up. And, it's like, oh, my God, we're never going to get home. So we finally got home July. And then that was 91, 92, I was out in Okinawa, Japan for my 6-month rotation. Come back, I joined another battery. They're getting ready to work up. Now Black Hawk Down has happened, right, in Somalia. So they've done all the work over there. They've gotten to the point where they say, you know what, the UN's pulling out. You guys, your guys are going to be part of the unit that covers the withdrawal of the UN out of Somalia. So our amphibious ready group, we go there, and do that. So point is, my first 3 years, really, I was never home. Hell, our first wedding anniversary was our 4th one that we shared together in the same location. So it was, but that's what you join the Marines. You think it is, and then after that, it kind of slowed down a little bit. You get into the 90s, the drawdown, the drawback, and there was I did a UDP again, going back to Japan. Come back, and it wasn't until 2003 when the Iraq War, Operation Iraqi Freedom, kicked in, and that's when the 20-year, after 9/11, all of that. I guess Afghanistan in 2001, Iraqi Freedom in 2003, and then that just trundled on for the next 20 years.
Where were you when 9/11 happened?
That's a great question. I had come home from California for a funeral, and I was at my mom's house over on Coolidge, and I was still on California time, and so it was early. She came in and woke me up and says, "Hey, you gotta come and look at this on the TV." And I went in and looked at the TV, and about that time, the second aircraft hit the tower. And I got on the phone and I called Debbie, and I said, "Hey, are you checking this out?" And she had just kind of found out herself because it was still early days there. And I said, "Get me on a plane, get me back, because I need to get back to my unit." And we had no idea what a fruitless endeavor that was going to be. Everything completely shut down, and I was stuck in Wichita for 3 days before they finally opened the airports again, and I was able to get back to California. But that was crazy. And I made the comment just kind of off the cuff that this is going to change everything. And I will tell you that if you were in the military, it changed a lot. I mean, for the civilian community, you guys are a little more inconvenienced at the airports and stuff. But I always said that if you don't have a personal stake in that global war on terror, it was out of sight, out of mind. George Bush Jr. He said, George Bush Jr. He said, go about your daily routine. Go back to the malls. Go shopping. And you know what? America listened, and they did. And for 20 years, there's a small segment of society that was in the fight. And you think about how little that was put on the TVs, how much of that was actually in the daily discussion. It was out of sight, out of mind, unless you were one of those people that was downrange or you had family members that were downrange. Because hell yeah, my kid and my wife, they were mental. And my kid would go to school, and none of, where she was going to school, there were no military kids. And they couldn't understand. They could not get their mind wrapped around that. And so it was, when I made that comment, I didn't know how right that I was. because it was a hell of a 20 years or so whenever the final tally was, and I don't think there's enough tequila in this bottle for us to go into the we talk about that right there is a potential off ramp that we could go down, but 9/11 right here in Wichita when that happened, crazy.
I was going to ask you, what was the overall perception of being in the military after 9/11? Like, what's your counterparts, what was the discussion?
It was, well, again, just because of who we are and what it is that we train to do, everybody, all right, we're going to go get some. We're getting some payback. And everybody was singularly focused, and we remained singularly focused up until the bitter end about getting, I don't want to say that, about retribution. I don't want to say retribution either. I don't know who's going to see this thing and they're going to say, yeah, those guys are there's retribution killings. That's not true. That's not where I want to go. We wanted to avenge what had happened. And I don't want to say avenged either. You understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, totally.
Yes.
Singularly focused. To the point that when it all went south at Abbey Gate, in the end.
Yep.
Even though I've been retired for, several years at that point, devastating. You just reflect on the loss of life. You reflect on the heinous injury and maiming and just the total destruction of human life as of your friends and team members, and you're like, what the fuck was it? Was this worth it? And it's pretty easy to become jaundiced at that point, and I made the comment one time that fuck, we were the cost of doing business. When you look at the amount of money that was made through all the military industrial complex, 4,900 dead dudes in a population of however many billion, million. That's a drop in the bucket. The amount of billions of dollars that were made, and a lot of guys, and they have a hard time with that. I have a hard time with it still, but the Marines, and I'm sure, and I did an exchange tour with the Army at Fort Bragg. I was at Bragg. I went to Iraq with a Fort Bragg unit, and they were very focused too. Okay, but I speak for the Marines because we understand our lot in life and what it is that we're trained to do. Now, that starts to get into the slippery slope of, okay, why are we over there trying to, build schools and do all this other crap? The Marines exist for one thing, right? To break things and kill people. And then you start making them, hand out backpacks, with school supplies to kids. Winning hearts and minds, man, shit. And, one of them kids turns around and they load up one of those backpacks with an IED and send him off into the, because you know what? Americans are decent people, and they see little kids and they're drawn to them, like the little puppies, or kittens that they would find on the ground, and they would, the same with kids, they gravitate, and we would give them, we'd throw them candy and we would give them water and we would give them food, mistake. I mean, it's just like feeding, the ducks down at the, at the pond, right? But they would come up and we would allow them to get in close, and sometimes that meant with catastrophic, end. And holy shit, you want to talk about, eye-opening experience? When, you read about it, you think about it, okay? But when you see it, you're just like, oh my God, really? That is the way the world is. Which, guys, and I don't want to get on the soapbox too much, but, I listen to young people talk. I got nieces and nephews, and they listen to what I say, and they kind of raise their eyebrow, or they kind of like, what the hell, okay? And I see people on TV, I see all these protests and stuff. Everybody that says how bad this country is, I say fuck them, because you know what? If you've never been out of this country, okay, you don't know what the hell it is you're talking about. Because all you people that are protesting, and again, I'm just saying, the gay rights people, you go over to the Middle East, they'll throw your ass off of a building, right? They'll chop your hand off, okay? Oh, and they're down there protesting, no king or whatever the protest is this week. But the bottom line is that people bitch and complain about how bad this country is, and I guarantee you, 99% of those individuals have never been out of the country. They have not seen. They have not seen the poverty, the lawlessness, the despair that is out there. I mean,
or if they have, they've been to Great Britain.
Yeah.
Another first world. They have not been to where you've been.
Right. Yeah, I talk about. I always talk about Iraq was a good one for me. Being on going in convoy, and we would go from our fob to up into the green zone, which is where all the muckety mucks were up there, the higher headquarters, in one of the palaces. But we'd have to drive past this. It was essentially a dump, and you look out there, and there's people living in the dump. There's people out there gathering water, right, that is running through this dump, which you can imagine, what it's been soaking in, but that's how they live, okay? They talk about fascism and all that. They have no clue, okay? In fairness, I was in Vietnam, communist country, right? As part of our, consultation talk, well, they're gonna take us to play golf, because all the good business gets done on the golf course, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm playing golf in Vietnam, and I look around, and we were the only ones on the course. This clubhouse is enormous, immaculate. No one's in there, because if you're not part of the state process, you're not allowed to even look over the fence. You know what I'm saying? That's that's the government having their knuckle down your back. This stuff we have is baby shit, but it gets blown up again by people who have no clue.
We just have no perspective.
Right, and
we're even we like to think about things as deeply as we can, and we try our best, but we don't have any perspective. Yeah, right. We can read books and look at the Civil War and look at the Revolutionary War and look at all these other wars, but we have no idea the life that you have lived and so many other people like you have lived, and we would never know it unless we lived it.
Yeah. And and I tell you, that's guys that come home, guys that have been in for a while, that's the hardest thing, is because you're surrounded by friends and family, but the problem is at that point, they no longer get you the way that you need to be got. And I don't know if that makes sense, but sometimes you find it much easier. I go to reunions, right? And I see these old guys that I've gone to, the fight with or what have you. And it's much easier because everybody's kind of on the same song sheet, Sometimes I get out and I interact with people, and it's just like they have no, trying to stay dialed in to something that doesn't come across as one being, crazed lunatic, or two, that is relatable, and that's a hard thing to do. Because I will tell you, there's a generation that, and they do talk about the greatest generation. It was the greatest generation. But I will tell you, I got a lot of respect for this generation that did this global war on terror, the last, 20 some odd years. Okay? Because, it wasn't D-Day, invasion type stuff, but they're out there every day slogging through the fight. And it damn sure didn't end with a victory parade, And Guys keep their head up a lot. Some don't. I mean, you guys see the statistics, right? 22 veterans a day ish, take their own life. And I can't tell you, four funerals. I've been to 4 funerals of teammates who have taken their own life because they got to the breaking point. And that's a horrific thing, because you think, God damn, that guy had his shit together. Wife, 3 kids, was doing great. And then it happens. And so, we were talking like, oh fuck, how do you protect yourself so that doesn't happen to you? What's to say that one day the switch flips and you're just like, shit. So I think that a lot, that's the other thing. Everybody's they're on their guard, and we keep our ear to the ground. You see guys that are having trouble, it's people are very quick to reach out, in the forums, in our smaller groups. If somebody's, having issues, or even, saying things that, that didn't sound quite right. So let's just ask the next question. Okay? And you have to listen. That's what we always had been taught. You ask the question, but you got to really want to hear the answer. Because sometimes, yeah, how you doing? I'm good, man. Okay, yeah, good. You're good, I'm good. Instead of, no, really, are you good? That's not what that's not the vibe I'm getting off of you. And 9 times out of 10, that will elicit, further conversation. So this is getting to be a hell of a lot darker than I hoped it should be.
No, it's
totally
really important stuff.
Yeah.
It really is.
It is.
I feel like a podcast is supposed to be back and forth between the host and the guest, and I feel like that has not been the case. This has been the guest monopolizing the entire freaking...
If Jack and I wanted to hear ourselves talk, we would do it without a guest. When we have guests on, we have them on for a reason.
Right. No, he's exactly right. It's a shame. It's terrible that we don't do more for veterans when they come home.
Yeah.
It's really awful. It's disgusting.
What would you do? If you were the president or you were the ultimate decision maker, what do you think you would do to try and solve that problem?
Well, I would make sure, and every time the Wounded Warrior commercial comes on, or any of those guys, selling that, it's an indictment on our nation. Because if we were really doing what we were supposed to be, there wouldn't be a need for Wounded Warrior Foundation or Twin Towers or any of that other stuff. Okay? But I would damn sure make sure that all these guys that have been, maimed or mutilated, are getting the first class medical care that they deserve. And I'm not slagging the VA or anybody else. I'm just saying that, we got a lot of smart, creative doctors, and in some cases they are doing the right thing by them. Gary Sinise and his foundation, for the guys that are paralyzed, they've got the walkers, the upright walkers that they're fitting these guys with. But still, taking care of the families of the guys that have been, the Gold Star families, making sure that their kids, they're going to go to college. And again, the Marine Corps, they do that. They have, the foundations that make sure that, we're going to make sure that this, this dead Marine's son is going to get a chance to go to college through the scholarship fund. So yeah, I would make sure that, they got their houses, that the houses are taken care of, all that stuff that you see people doing. Okay. And for the vets that coming out, just, not even the wounded, holy shite, not even the wounded, just the people that have served, again, giving them an opportunity to make a living, finding a way to get them fast tracked, okay, into some well-paying job, into a good job, teach them a career, get them another, and and in fairness, VA does a good job doing that to an extent. But again, if I'm sending dudes into the breach, I'm going to make sure when they come home they're getting the best treatment that they can find. And I would tell you that in a lot of cases that's not the case, and that's sad. And that's why you see, Trace Atkins, wherever it is, up there in his old country draw talking about let's go help these guys out. Shouldn't have to do it.
It's a reflection of who you are as a country, how you treat these people, and that's a reflection on us as Americans that this is a problem. It's
the cycle. You guys you talk about the hard times create the good men create the good times, the good times create the weak men create the hard times, right? And it's that cycle. And we're, unfortunately, in my opinion, we're in that good times have created weak men, and it's going to take another catastrophic event, okay, much more catastrophic than we can imagine, okay, I think, to right that ship. 9/11 was a great example. Yeah, everybody was kind of on board, right? But after a while, it fell off. Here's a good anecdote for you about 9/11. I got back. I was in Alameda, California. That's where I was stationed. I was on independent duty out there, instructor duty in the city of Alameda, and the Oakland A's were playing in the AL Division Series, and they called up and they said, "Hey, we're going to do a military appreciation thing because this is October, right? Right after 9/11. I mean, it's fresh. We're going to do a military appreciation night. There's going to be 50,000 fans in the stands. Mountain Davis had never seen that many people sitting in the bleachers, right? We want to get representatives from all the units. We want the commands to throw out the first pitch. The commanders to throw out the first pitch. Whole 9 yards." Okay, we're in. My boss, he's not a baseball guy. He knew I was a baseball guy. I was a season ticket holder for the Oakland A's. He goes, "You're gonna throw out the pitch." Okay. Well, and I've got the video. I'll show you sometime. But I had to do it in dress blues, and dress blues are very constrictive. I mean, it's a very tight, form-fitting uniform. So I had to get out there and practice, trying to throw, because the last thing I wanted to do was bounce one, in front of a national TV audience or whatever the hell was.
As your Navy guy to the left, there was a heater.
Right. And fortunate for me, there were some broke dick representatives, because they had them all. Air Force, Coast Guard, yep. Coast Guard was even there, and Ron Washington was the guy that caught me.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and I blasted in there, and he had to come up out of his crouch. It was because there was no way I was going to bounce it. I'd throw it over his head into the backstop before I bounced it. But that's all a side story. But when we got to the stadium, this goes back to your thing about the civilian and their kind of thoughts towards the military. We're forming up in the parking lot because we had units that were going to march in. They did the whole 9 yards. We're marching in, and some dude from the top of the stadium yells down, "What the fuck are you guys doing here? How come you ain't over fucking getting the Taliban?" And I was just like, it was very prophetic, because it was, that was all very fresh. I was like, who the hell is this guy? He's a lost cause. But that's kind of how it kind of followed down that road after the shine of 9/11 and all the feelings of patriotism gradually kind of filtered away. It was just us there every day doing the job. Just, I wouldn't say 9 to 5, because it wasn't.
Right.
A lot of cases it was 24 hours a day, 13 months at a time. And that's I did a 13-month deployment, and I didn't get I got mid-tour leave at the 10-month mark. Yeah, it was Wow. It was awesome. Again, more Father of the Year points. I am unstoppable as it relates to that. There's nobody that can ever top me. So yeah, you guys have all the kids you want, but you will never top me as follow year.
What was the what's the word I'm looking for? The thought after Bin Laden was killed. What was the military? What was going on in the military after that? How'd you guys react to that?
Everybody was happy. We weren't, the folks that had been around for a while, we were not happy with the fact that they decided to deep six the body, and there was no. I think that we needed that closure. When we saw Saddam Hussein get his neck stretched, that was closure.
Does the president make that call? Who makes that call? Can I ask that even?
Yeah, I would just tell you that the president wasn't making that call.
Okay.
And you look at the administration going on at the time. There were some hardcore dudes in there that they were running the show. Bush, Obama, they were not in charge. And that's the scary thing, is that people see somebody strong like President Trump that's out there doing what he's doing, but I'll tell you, there's a shadow war going on against him on the inside, and it's bigger. I think it's bigger than he could fathom. I think it's bigger than any of us can fathom. Susie Meitzner asked me what I thought about Pete Hegseth. Was he the right guy for the job? I said, well, I think anybody getting in there could do that job if they surround themselves with some trustworthy people. The problem is, I don't know that you can find somebody with knowledge of that building, of working within that building, that is not tainted or corrupted to some degree. And I'm sure my FBI handler that is listening to this conversation will be taking notes on that. But I think that there's a lot of that going on, and as much of the good as they try to do, they're being fought at every turn because they've been in the building for 30 years. They know the tricks. These covert operators. They know how it works. Hegseth doesn't know that. I mean, shit, I wouldn't even know where to start. I can manage people, okay? I can manage a shitload of people. But if you're getting subverted from the inside because the people that are supposed to be helping you get around some of these, obstacles, but they're refusing to give you the information that you need, or they're, trying to send you down the wrong path to keep you from, going down the right path, that's a tough road to hoe. And I will tell you that God bless the president for at least trying. I mean, hell, they took a shot at him.
Tried to take two.
Almost two.
Yeah.
So
it's a risky arena to play in.
Yes, and like I said, it's a machine, and there's a lot of money involved, unimaginable amounts of money that are involved, and that's why when I said earlier, we're the cost of doing business. 4,900 guys getting killed in Iraq that's a squirt of piss. That's a fair trade for the amount of money that was put out on the table, and layer upon layer upon layer of bureaucracy. The Doge team going in there trying to uncover all that. People started getting pissed because their rice bowl was getting messed with, and the gravy train was kind of getting interrupted there, or there was the potential for it to be interrupted, and they did not like that. The institution did not like that. The collective does not like that.
The lack of accountability is so infuriating.
Dude.
There's no audit. It's just a black hole. It is. It's just a black hole of unaccountability and power.
Yeah. I want to tell you a story about taking brand new equipment like protective equipment, because we didn't want to give it to the Afghans, and so and it cost too much money to send home. So we were taking it to the burn piles, brand new shit, just throwing it in the burn piles because we didn't want. That is a podcast for another week. We could talk about the crazy shit that goes on as far as that's concerned. And you're absolutely right. There is a lot of it, and it runs way deep. Marianas Trench deep. So we continue with the doom and gloom podcast.
Yep. Yep.
God. All right, how else can I bring you down?
How do you handle fear in a combat zone? And is it contagious? Can fear be contagious?
It can be, but I will tell you that it is almost. And I always used to joke, like jumping out of an airplane. I was an airborne guy, and when you're standing there and you're getting ready to go out that door, it's just like you're just like, this is not a sane thing to do, and your head just comes off, and you're just like, okay, I've been trained, I know what I'm doing, and I just plow straight ahead. And that's the thing, if you train hard, if you train realistically in combat, you can only hope that kicks in. Are you scared? Absolutely. Okay? But you look around, okay, and you see you got these other guys here, okay? It brings you right back to, okay, my entire career I have been trained for this situation, okay? Fear be damned, we're going. It's not till after. You go back to the fob, and we would get back late, and you can't sleep. You go out, I'd smoke several cigars, and just stare up at the stars and try to unpack what had happened. But I will tell you, from day one, the Marine Corps does a good job in telling its history to young recruits and young officers. And they talk about it in terms of, if they're having a classroom setting, they start off by reading a Medal of Honor citation from a guy. So from day one, okay, you start getting inculcated with that. Despite the situation, he gathered his wits and, did A, B, and C, and, some guys, they don't make it. They get it posthumously. Other guys, they get a chance to put Big Blue on their neck and drive on. In retrospect, going back to your question, I think that people process it differently too. Okay? I thought that I was fortunate enough to have the ability to almost become detached from reality, for lack of a better term. And is it contagious? I think that when you see a leader fold up under pressure, that is not a good sign. I was just trying to reflect, thinking if I was ever involved in a situation where but you understand what I'm saying. So again, in your training, that is hammered into you from day one. Okay, you've got to lead from the front. Okay, you're the guy that has to, let's go, follow me. Come on, you sons of bitches, do you want to live forever? It's that kind of stuff. I mean, from day one, they teach you that. And, yeah. But to your point, I think that people handle fear differently. And yes, I think that in some cases it could be contagious, which is why you have to, make sure you've got strong people that are out there leading your teams in these crisis situations. And I'll tell you, it doesn't have to be a damn officer. It doesn't have to be some gunnery sergeant. Time and time again, we've seen the young Lance Corporal, You know, a guy's at E3, right? 18 years old, out there taking charge and, you know, stacking bodies. So, situation, I mean, you just never know. You know, we always talk about the goofiest guy in the unit, right? Like, he's the one that's going to end up winning the Medal of Honor. You know, everybody gives him shit, you know, because he's, you know, a Private Larry Mitchell from, you know, West Virginia, joking about him having sex with his sister on Friday night, you know, that kind of stuff. That's the dude right there that is going to, you know, roll over on a hand grenade for a fellow Marine. You know.
Wow.
When I was coaching at Carroll, I did their leadership symposiums for the squads in the morning, and we talked about these two young lance corporals that were on a post, and Yale and Harder, and this was in Iraq. Bottom line, a suicide truck comes plowing through the thing, and they had like 6 seconds from the time that they realized, you know, what was happening, that this truck was running the barriers. There's a whole barracks full of Marines and Iraqi Army guys sleeping here. They had 6 seconds from the time that they started breaking the barriers for those guys to engage with the rifles. And they did. They killed the driver, but the explosion, it killed both of them. And these are Lance Corporals. And they had 6 seconds to decide, okay, what do we do? They haven't gone through the training that I'd gone through, that their gunnery sergeant or their, you know, the squad leader had gone through. There's just guys standing on a post. And, you know, again, everything aside, that's the wonder, you know, being associated with the Marine Corps. Or, you know, if you're an Army dude, you know, or the Navy, it's that. That is what keeps you coming back for more. That's what makes you proud of, you know, that makes all the bullshit go away. If you can filter it down to that. So.
Yeah, that's extraordinary.
Yeah. Books could be written. There are so many unsung, unnamed, unrecognized acts of heroism every day that it would occur. They don't make the headlines, but shit, it's out there. It's out there, and that's the part that gets lost in the rotor wash of everyday life. You know, you guys don't know. It's not a knock on you. It's just sad to me.
Oh yeah,
because they deserve better. As far
absolutely.
And you know, and nine out of 10, I wouldn't want the recognition. I was just doing my job. I just, you know, that's what I was trying to do. Drop on. Next slide. Here we go. Extraordinary young men and women.
It's really a shame that, you know, citizens don't hear those stories, because you know, those stories have an effect on the majority amount of people, and maybe people would think differently on certain things if they did hear those stories. But there's countless stories like that, and you never hear about any of them.
Yeah.
Whether that's intentional or not, it's just unfortunate.
Right. Yeah. And again, I think it just further illustrates the disconnect, I think, that there is between the country and her military. And you talk about the gap, you know, World War II, the country and the military, they were like this.
Yep.
Korea starts to come apart. Vietnam, way the hell out there. 9/11, okay, we're getting kind of back in. Global war on terror, 20 years. We're back out to here. You know, so again, my earlier comment about a catastrophic, you know, I don't know what it is. But until that happens, yeah, I don't know. I think that gap continues to expand. And yeah, that's not good. It's not good for the military, and it's damn sure not good for the population. The population doesn't know that it's not good for them just because they're dumb. They're uninformed. They're not dumb. They're uninformed.
They're just blind to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Have I brought you down enough? Because I can. You know what? We can go. Let's tee this up again next week.
Yeah.
We're in.
We'll do it. We'll do it at Bar 125 during the basketball season. I'll give you an impromptu.
That'll be perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, it will be.
We moved our seats over there.
You're still next to us, right?
Were you there last year?
No, we would just come over there at halftime.
Oh shit! I thought you sat next to us.
No, we were in 114, way exact opposite corner.
Damn.
From y'all, and I could see where you guys were because I could see the backboard, and you guys are always right off the left upper corner of the backboard. So when I would start looking for who's coming in, that was my aim point.
Well, Jack and I held the line. We, mom and dad, but talking about how, and I get it, they're just over it and the cost of it. But they have a ticket, and we bought a ticket, so we're keeping them.
All right.
Yeah.
It only took 27 years for me to start forking up cash for the tickets.
That's a pretty good
30 for me.
That's a pretty good run.
God, they're expensive though.
Yeah, I know.
Unbelievable.
Well, and I got the say-so guys wearing me out on the for the contribution, and
Sure.
you're just like shit.
How much more do you want?
Yeah. I mean, I show up, don't I?
Yeah. The tickets and the parking is right. That too.
Show up, you're buying drinks.
That's right.
I know, man.
Yeah. So anyway, we moved over to that side. We're sitting up right behind you. You know where Phil Blanton?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're right there at that, almost that last row before you go out.
So you can quickly get to the bar.
Yes. It's very important.
That was a game changer when they started selling booze at Coke Arena.
Yeah, but I don't know any different.
Yeah, you're right.
I came back. That was a thing. So, all right. What's your last? You got.
I was gonna ask you
That last one.
I hear about the desert spiders in Iraq. What are they? What?
It's just a big old. It's a big old hairy
They come
freaking
after
spider.
You? Big old.
They don't strike fear into you or anything.
Now I'll tell you what strikes fear into me is I was out in the jungle in Okinawa up in the northern training area at the Jungle Warfare School, and you're patrolling at night. It's completely black. There's no. Back then we didn't have night vision or any of that shit. It was caveman style patrolling in the jungle, and they got these big old spiders that hang up there in the trees. And
where at?
In Okinawa, up in. There you go.
Oh, those look nasty.
Yeah. So we were in the northern training area, which is in the northern part of the Okinawa island. And patrol, and you are walking, and you hit a web in your face in the dark.
Oh, no.
And you know that is on there. and you're trying to maintain your noise discipline. And it's just like, shit. Terrible. Terrible. Yeah. I tell you, I've been to Vietnam, and I've been out there in the jungle, and I've done jungle warfare training in triple canopy jungle. That's no joke. The jungle, that's the last place I'd ever want to fight. I always said that my early days I didn't want to be cold. I think of the guys in Korea or some of that shit, just terrible conditions. But the jungle, crazy. Guadalcanal, I was down on Guadalcanal, and I went back up into a place called Bloody Ridge, which was a famous fight for the Marine Corps. The Raiders, that's kind of where they got their first, bloodletting. A guy called John Basilone won a Medal of Honor there. And, I went back into the place where his position was. And, we were fortunate because there was a guy that lived on the island that had, he was the Battle of Guadalcanal dude. He had it, and he knew the ground, walked us right back to where Basilone's position was. And I'm looking to my left and right, and I'm thinking, God dang, you're under fire. How are you tied into your left and right when you can't even see, 5 feet? How are you getting ammo distributed? How are you doing water? How are you controlling the fight? And these dudes, they did it day after day, and if they survived, year after year, you know. So yeah, the jungle's it's a bad place. Never really got bothered too much with the camel spiders. I mean, I'd see them in places because you know in a building or something, they would get, you know, up in the corner, but I was never personally touched.
Gotcha. There's an HBO series I watched called The Pacific. They talk about John Basilone a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought
two
it up.
medals of honor, and he died on Iwo Jima. So he wins the Medal of Honor, you know, down there in Guadalcanal, and ends up, you know, getting all the way to Iwo, and he gets killed. But yeah, Basilone was the Manila John. He was the man.
They talk about him a lot.
Part of that Marine Corps lore. I mean, from day one, we learned about guys like John Basilone.
Did they talk about like Eugene Sledge?
Eugene Sledge. Oh. Yep, all of it with the old breed.
Yeah, got it sitting up there.
Oh, there it is.
On this yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, another fascinating story.
Damn.
Yeah.
Well read.
Yeah, a lot of half-read books.
Yeah. You guys have been over at my house. I got an entire bookcase. They're all half-read. Half-read.
But yeah, I have learned a lot about Eugene Sledge.
Yeah.
Another legendary Medal of Honor recipient.
Well, like I said, those guys are in a league themselves. You know, we always talk about standing on the shoulders of giants. You know, those, you know. World War I, Marine Corps kind of got their feet wet. You know, when we fought at Belleau Wood, you know, that was kind of the first foray. And yeah, it's very historic for us. We hang our hat on that a lot. And that's where we got the term devil dog. The Germans said that these Americans fought like hounds from hell, Teufelhunden. And, you know, so that's what they, hey, devil dog. That's what we use the term to this day.
Wow.
Right. But it was World War II where we really, you know, with the amphibious, you know, landings and, you know, that whole, you know, island hopping, I mean, that cemented the Marine Corps legacy, I think. Yeah, I think it was Nimitz who said when the flag, was it Nimitz? I'm having old man's disease, but when the flag went up on Iwo Jima, he said the raising of that flag means that there'll be a Marine Corps.
Did you see that?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Mount Suribachi.
Yeah. Yep.
Legendary picture.
That is such a great picture.
Legendary group.
Well, have
of
you
men.
read that book, Flags of Our Fathers?
No, I need to.
Yeah.
I've heard about it.
Yeah. Although there is some controversy now that they may have misidentified some of the guys that were actually in the picture.
No shit.
Yeah.
Really?
You believe it?
I don't know. There was some back and forth there. Maybe it was the late '90s, early 2000s that this was going around, but there had been some controversy that you know, maybe somebody was in that picture that was misrepresented. Mm. But still, what a great, you know, Joe Rosenthal. I mean, the epic picture. Right place at the right time. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, that's as good as it gets. I got one final question for you. What is a lesson learned that we can use, that you learned in your military career that we can use in civilian life?
Well, I will tell you this. You don't have to be the smartest fucker in the room. Okay? It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to change your mind. Okay? As a young leader, I didn't get that. And it was my way, right, wrong, or indifferent. We're doing this. Aye, sir. Put your heels together and let's go. Okay? That was hard. That's a hard way to do business. It wasn't until I became a more senior officer when I realized the value of my teammates and the value of their input. And when I personally, got to the point where, you know what, can the ego, it's okay not to have all the answers. Ask the question if you don't understand. I will tell you that it's a disease, and I think it's rampant in all the services. I think it's rampant in all society at those higher levels. You know, people's egos get to the point where, you know, if they don't know, they bullshit it, okay? And at at oftentimes great detriment, okay, to their organization. But that's the takeaway. The value, right, of having a team that is comfortable enough with you to say, boss, I don't think he got that right, okay? Because what you don't want to have is a team that is sitting on their hands because they're scared shitless that they're going to get their heart torn out for asking, for questioning the boss. So, again, you may think you're the smartest guy in the room. Can you bleep that other part out? I'll tell you a good story about fuckers if I can. But you don't have to be the smartest guy in the room, and you have to value your team. I think in corporate America, you don't have that, where they, in an organization like the Marine Corps, we really do value those guys that sit around the table with us. And you know what? I've had corporals or lance corporals raise their hand and ask the $1 million question and cause all these, Harvard graduate, brainiac officers, just like, holy shit, why didn't we think of that? But I'm saying it takes time to mature into that mindset. And it took me a while. But I'm telling you that my life got exponentially easier when I really put the ego aside and, started, asking the questions. Not faking it. If I didn't know, I didn't know. And it's okay. I don't know if that gets to what you were looking for, but I'm just saying for me, that was a game changer. And unfortunately, it wasn't until I was like a major, before I figured that out. Luckily, I did figure it out by the time I got into, command of, the battalions and the regiment. And then it really carried on out into when I went to DPAA, because not only did I have military dudes there, but I also had PhD scientists, PhD archaeologists, and they were not used to having a military dude talk to them in a very direct manner. Okay? They were also not used to a military dude asking them for their opinion, because military dudes prior to me had been, this is the way we're doing it. Get your heels on line and let's go. Okay? And it worked wonders. So, as you guys progress, wherever you go in life, just no one was around to tell us that. And I think maybe, without me telling you that, you'd have to find out on your own. I found out on my own. I'm telling you, it worked. And so, I think that it applies to work. I think that it applies to your daily life, in your interactions with the community. Okay? Now, let's go back to my statement about the smartest fucker in the room, right? So I told you I did the leadership thing for the Bishop Carroll. Mm-hmm. Day one, I show up. I'm just kind of a casual observer in the back of the room. I'm getting a feel for what's going on. About 7:45, the track kids have to get up and leave. They stand up, and I'm like, hey, what? Well, we've got track. I said, okay. So as they start to pile out the door, I said, listen, because next week I own the process, right? I'm going to be the guy. I said, look, when you fuckers show up here next week, you better bring a pencil and a piece of paper to write on. Because if I'm standing up here giving you this gouge, you better be taking notes. Because I'm not up here flapping my gums, for my own health. They leave. Jim Nance leans over to me and he says, yeah, the Catholic diocese really frowns on the term fuckers when referring to the students. Yeah, and again, I'm fresh off, retirement, and so again, hopefully you can bleep all that out. But I got to the point. Dusty Trail, he pulled me aside and said, "Look, you can only have 7 of those F-bombs a day. You can only have 7." And they cautioned me on my language, and I mean, I would get so fired up at those kids, and they must have thought that I was a stark raving lunatic or I was having a stroke or something, because I'm like, and I'm trying to use a word that wasn't, profanity, and I'm like, you individual creatures, and they're like, what is this guy? Yeah, that was about, trying to deprogram 35 years of, bad habits. But yeah, the Catholic diocese really frowns on the term fuckers. These kids. Yeah, so let's bleep this.
Gotcha.
No, that's great. That's great. The advice about asking questions when you don't know, it's invaluable.
It's okay not to know. And, your life will be exponentially easier. And it's not just asking the questions, but it's valuing the input of your team. Now, as a leader, at some point, you got to cut off the discussion. Look, I've made the decision. This is the way we're going. Okay? And, but there's been times when, after going home that night and I reflected on it again, I changed my mind. Let's go with your idea. A lot of guys don't want to do that. I made the decision. We're going. Hell or high water. So, use that.
And the fact that it's okay to change your mind.
Yeah.
I think
it is.
Everybody in politics should learn that.
Well,
even though they won't.
Yeah.
No, they won't. But, what's the goal? To do it right, or, to have a big ego? Yeah. The goal is to do it right. So change your mind till it's right.
Yeah. But, in fairness, there can't be, you got to get to the point where you make a decision.
Sure.
If not, you just keep kicking the can down the road. And I used to talk to it in terms of Zone 1 and Zone 2. When we were in Zone 1, I told my guys, we're in Zone 1, whatever you want to say. Be respectful, but say it. If you got a problem with what I'm saying, but when we get to Zone 2, discussion's over. I've made my decision. We're going. And I tried to spend a majority of my time in Zone 1 in my older days, the later part of my career. Zone 2, okay, well, we've had the discussion. Now this is the way we're going. And I think that because my teams began to see that's how I did business, they were comfortable with that because they had a chance to give their say. And they had to learn to be grown up about it, that when the decision went the way that they didn't want it to go, that they didn't have to hold a grudge about it. That's the other thing. We've had the discussion, the decision was made, it didn't go my way. Don't be a dick. Don't try to subvert the plan because it wasn't, the way you wanted it. Sir, let's go. We'll get them next time. So, yeah, our government can learn that lesson.
Yes, they can.
Yes, they can.
See my earlier slide about the Pentagon.
Yes, they can. That's fantastic advice. Well, sir, you brought up the no kings thing. The only time I'm yelling no kings is when I'm sitting on a 13 at the blackjack table. No kings, no kings. 23.
We already had the No Kings Day. That was back in 1776, wasn't it?
Yeah,
That's
you
right.
aren't kidding. You aren't kidding.
That's right.
You aren't kidding. Very funny.
Well, Mike, this was great.
I was just looking at my watch. Damn.
I told you before this thing.
These
flew
by.
Fly.
This flew by. You have anything for us?
No, I'm just, like I said, this, you ought to just burn this one. This is, I don't feel good about this at all. I'm going to go home and obsess about this all night.
Well,
don't do that.
I'm humbled. I really am. And it doesn't get said enough. Thank you. Thank you for your service. Yep. It never gets said enough in this country.
I appreciate it. And I say, you don't want to thank me, just be a good citizen. That's how vets want to be thanked. Be a good person that, does the right thing and, lives up to the ideals that this country's, founded on. Don't be a dick. Semper Fi.
Awesome.
Well said.
Should we leave it on that? You got anything?
No. I'm out.
I'm out too.
Mike, thank you so much.
You guys, it was fun.
You are awesome.
I appreciate it.
Seriously.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.